All right, welcome to Module 3. In this module, our expert will cover tweaking and testing. So get ready to take some notes and let's jump right in.
All right, now let's look into the testing and tweaking aspect of conversion optimization. This is really the most important and core and fundamental part of conversion optimization. This is where you really got to sort of roll your sleeves up and get into it, change things, see what happens, change things again, see what happens. And the first thing we want to talk about is what to tweak. And there's a long list of things to tweak. Anything's tweakable. The idea, though, is that you want to tweak things in isolation. Unless you have enough of an ad budget and a big enough volume of traffic that you can do multivariate split testing. And we'll talk about some of the software and the methods for split testing towards the end of this module. But generally speaking, you want to make sure that you do your tweaking and testing in a manner that makes it very clear which one variable made which one difference once you're looking at all the data. If you change 3 things and you see an increase in sales or opt-ins, well, great, but you don't know which of the 3 things had that impact, and it's also very possible that one of those 3 things had a negative impact. So although you had a net gain, the net gain could have been bigger if it hadn't been for one of those 3 variables being there, and you won't know what that is, or if that's the case, because you didn't isolate the variables. So variables, very important. We'll talk about that again towards the end. First, though, what can you tweak? What can you tweak? The first thing to look at is the headline, right? The real moneymaker, main thing that you're using to capture your prospect's attention and tell them what it is that you're offering them, right? Depending on the product, depending on the prospect and the target audience and the occasion, you could end up trying to sell a product that you think is super premium quality or is super premium quality, and you think that's the most important thing to your prospect. And so you might have a headline that says 100% cashmere wool scarf, only the finest materials. And it does terrible. And so then you try a different angle and you say, our best cashmere sweaters, 50% off this week only, right? And that's the headline. That's the big, bold font. And that performs way better. Or maybe it's the other way around. Depends on your audience. So headlines are definitely one of the first things that you want to consider split testing. And that starts with a little bit of brainstorming. You want to make sure that there's a little bit of logic and thinking behind, the reason for trying this angle versus that angle. And once you've figured out what angle you want to go with after a little bit of testing there, then you can tweak even further by picking this word versus that word. So headlines and subheadlines are very important, as are other instances of sales copy, right? So I mentioned subheadlines there. That's very important. Bullet points are also incredibly important. So you might find that a bullet point, let's say you're selling a cell phone, and a bullet point that says, our biggest level of storage yet, 200 gigabytes of storage, might not do as well if you test that against something that is more benefit-driven rather than feature-driven. So instead of that bullet point, let's say that the storage bullet point says, enough storage for all of your favorite songs, TV shows, and special moments, or something along those lines, right? So bullet points, features, things like that are certainly something that you can split test. Sales copy applies to everything. Your guarantee, the type of guarantee that you have, or the sales copy that you use to convey what type of guarantee you have. If it's a digital product that you know that your customers can keep anyway, even if you tell them that they're not allowed to refund it and keep the product, well, why not just go all the way with it? If you know they're able to keep it anyway, why not tell them that, we're so confident that you can request a refund within 30 days and we'll even let you keep the product. A lot of people think that that'll encourage abuses, but it's actually quite the opposite. It'll actually encourage sales, and the amount of revenue that will be at stake because of the small instances of abuses usually is far outweighed by the positive conversion impact that you get, the increased sales that you get from it. So that would be another thing to tweak in the sales copy area. The wording of buttons. This is a very important one. There's psychological aspects at play here that have been shown, at least in many different split tests and studies, that people like clicking on buttons that say things in the first person, as though they are the ones saying them. So instead of download the free report or download your free report, it might say something like, give me the report or give me free access. Again, things change. And so something that might have worked 2 years ago across the board, maybe it doesn't work as well these days. And so you want to test, tweak, and test. And make sure you're isolating those variables. So button wording is definitely something to toy around with. And aside from the question of perspective, first person versus third person and so on and so forth, there's also the words that you use to describe the thing in question or the action, right? Download might be tested against the word read. Read it now versus download it now. And you might get surprisingly impressive results from one over the other. The name of the product that you're offering. Let's say it's a lead page and you're offering a free report or an ebook. You might find that the term ebook and free report, both of those are just so cliche and cringeworthy these days that calling it a guide or a blueprint or a game plan or something along those lines will bring you an increase in conversion rates. So that's another thing that you can certainly tweak and test. Next, we have shapes, fonts, and colors. So basic things, like we were talking about the buy button a moment ago, basic things like the shape of the buy button and the geometry of the buy button or the opt-in button can have a significant impact on conversion rates in many cases. A rounded button might, for some strange reason, perform better than a rectangular button, or a button that has sort of a 3D, sort of a pretend light glare or a shadow to it, might just for some reason have that psychological effect of people wanting to click on it because it feels more real. There have been tests that indicate that. You need to do your own tests, right? Because not everything works for everybody, and because sometimes things that universally worked change, and they don't work anymore because audiences change and the psychology of audiences change after they've been seeing things for a long time. But the shape of a button can have a surprising impact. There are a lot of long-form sales letter writers who swear by a special design of button that has little dotted or dashed lines in a square around it and certain wording on the inside. And that performed really, really well on old school long-form style sales pages. And so it might be worth using that, even if it looks ugly to you and you'd prefer something a little bit more modern and slick looking. Remember, it's about conversion rates. It's about conversion optimization. It's not about aesthetics. Another thing is we mentioned fonts and colors. Now we'll talk about colors of text and then colors of, sort of the thematic makeup of your page overall in a second here. Let's talk about fonts and colors of text first, though. This can be really good. It can also be overused, right? The best thing to do is isolate and pick out one or two colors that are very contrasted against everything else on your page. Usually it's going to be something like red, bright red. And be very selective about where and when you use it. It might be on the word now in the call to action, or it might be on an important feature or benefit. And the same goes for fonts and styling. So italicizing text in certain areas might have a beneficial impact. Making something bold and stand out a little bit more, like income claims or an important part of a testimonial, or underlining certain words. These things work in a few different ways. Number one, they bring attention and add emphasis to specific words, the colors, the bolding, the underlining, and so on and so forth. But they also break up the text and make it easier to read, or easier to skim and still understand what you just skimmed. Because most people, when they read a long-form sales letter, for example, they're just skimming. They're not really reading the entire thing, the vast majority of people. So if you can increase the amount of comprehension that they have about what you're offering when they skim by selective and careful use of fonts and styles and colors in your text, that can be definitely very beneficial. Then there's the question of color overall, like thematically, right? The color of your background, or the top bar on your landing page, or the button, or the outline of the opt-in box and things like that. You want there to be oftentimes a consistency, right? And also an ad scent, which refers to, not AdSense, the Google thing, ad scent. It refers to a consistency of look and feel from the ad that someone clicked on to come to this page that they're on right now, and the page that they've arrived on, right? So if you had sort of a blue and white brand thing going on in the ad that they clicked on, try and keep that blue and white brand, that theme to the overall landing page and the elements on it, on the page that they've just arrived on. Okay, it's a psychological continuity kind of thing, right? And that also applies to background images. Background images, or any images that you use on the landing page. If someone clicked an ad, if they're looking at an ad for an exercise bike, and there's a specific woman on an exercise bike, it can be really beneficial to have that same model. If you're browsing a stock photo website or something, try and get the same model on the landing page, or at a minimum, similar lighting and a similar, overall aesthetic and thematic look and feel to the ad that they clicked on. So imagery can be very important. Imagery and conversions, it goes really, really deep. Robert Cialdini has actually, in his studies, he's proven that background images can have an incredible and totally subconscious impact on people's decisions and their behavior. So background images of money might cause someone to buy something, right? Or background images, however subtle they are, background images of clouds might make someone more likely to order pillows, I think was one of the studies that he did. And it's one of those things that no one consciously says, oh, I see that in the background, so now I'm going to buy this. It's something that people aren't even consciously aware of. But it's very, frankly, it's kind of creepy how effective and how proven this stuff is. So definitely think about your background images. Other feature images, especially with regard to people, can be really beneficial here based on the audience that you're targeting. If you're targeting a market that consists of a lot of folks in, say, their 60s or 70s, in their retirement years, then guess what? Having pictures of people in that age group on your landing page, on your sales page or your opt-in page is going to be really beneficial to you in many cases. If you're selling something in the finance niche, the investment space, or, financial freedom type stuff, sometimes the imagery of lifestyle stuff, leisure stuff, people on the beach will have a positive impact on your conversion rate. So these are all things that you really want to test. And again, you can be very surprised by the results when you test these things. Pricing is a big one. There's a lot of psychology behind the numbers in prices. And some of it, frankly, is just goofy. It's those facepalm kind of things where, you can look at an offer that costed $10 plus $5 shipping, and it had a 10% conversion rate. But then they increased the price to $15, and then they said free shipping, and the conversion rate doubles, right? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that works, but it does work in many cases, right? So pricing is huge. Pricing, like we mentioned previously, sometimes things will be really cliche and corny, like the use of prices that end in 9 or 97 or 95. For whatever reason, even though everyone knows that they're goofy, that it's a silly concept, it still works. It still works really, really well. There are barriers of resistance, psychological resistance, that people will be up against when they're considering buying your products. And so you want to be mindful of that. Okay, your market might have a big barrier of resistance around the 3-0 mark, right? Where they don't want to cross that mark based on the specific product that you're selling. It doesn't have a value that they perceive to be worth $30, right? When they hear $30, certain things pop into their head. They picture a family meal that they had at a restaurant the other day. That was around $30. Or maybe, $30 is something that they pay on their, their utility bill, or it's some type of a monthly cost or something like that. Everyone has psychological ideas in their heads of what certain amounts represent to them. And for a certain product that you're selling, 30 might just be that barrier of resistance. And so as goofy as it sounds, it will very often be worth selling at 27 or 29 instead. Logically, it shouldn't make a difference, but it does. It does. So pricing is a big deal. Price slashing and demonstrating that you're decreasing the price from what you could charge versus what you are charging, literally slashing, putting a line through the number 100 and saying you're getting it for just $67 instead, and so on and so forth. Again, sometimes it comes off as cliche, but it does work. It's psychologically proven it does work. So you want to toy around with your pricing a little bit, especially if there's variables in your pricing, such as shipping. Definitely want to consider toying around with different pricing models and seeing how those impact your conversions. And the list goes on and on. Anything that you see that pops out to you on a sales page or a landing page is something that can be tweaked. And so the question is, how do you tweak it? How do you tweak it? And it really comes down to software in most cases. Software. You can do it manually. You can send an ad campaign to one page and then the same ad campaign to another page and just make sure they both have the same amount of traffic in the end and then compare how they did. But nowadays, there's so many tools specifically for split testing that you might as well use them, right? So Split Test Monkey is a great independent tool. It's independent from any landing page creator that you have. Basically, you set up the parameters of the split test and then it will give you the URLs to use. And there's, the entry point URLs, and then there's the success point URLs, and there's the tracking. And based on your conversions, it'll spit out the results of your split test. Variation A beat variation B by, 25% and what have you. So Split Test Monkey would be an example of an independent split testing tool. But most landing page services these days, most of the big ones, actually have split testing built into them. So they have their own analytics dashboard, and they have their own multivariate, in most cases, split testing set up. So you can go into, let's say, Instapage, for example, and you can create a cool-looking landing page, and then there'll be an option to split test, and it'll produce more variations of that page. And then each variation, you just tweak one or two different things, and then you try and tweak only one thing at a time. That's the most effective way to do it. And then especially if you're working with a limited amount of traffic and a limited ad budget, you really want to be as surgical as possible. But you have these different variations, and you run traffic to them, and you can siphon off, different percentages of traffic to different pages once it looks like you're, seeing a winner in one area. And you just look at the results, and you make your decisions based on that. If one headline has a really substantial, like a 20 or 30% higher conversion rate than another headline, well, guess what? You better go with that headline. Or that should be the new standard against which you now test different ideas. But one thing to keep in mind is going to be numbers and thresholds. The more certain you can be about your results, the better. And obviously, the smaller your sample size, the bigger the margin of error is going to be. Right, so you don't want a situation where you only sent 100 clicks into a split test, 50 went to variation A, 50 went to variation B, and you got, 20 opt-ins from variation A, and you got, 10 from variation B, and you're looking at that and you're like, wow, that's a huge difference. I'm going to go with variation A. Oh, sorry, it wasn't a big enough sample group. There's so many factors that could have caused that to come about, and it's very, very possible that if you had 1,000 visitors being siphoned through that split test, you would see very different results. Right, so you need a large sample group. I would recommend, if you can pull it off, if you have the ad budget for it, I would recommend not making any decisions based on split tests until you have had 100 results, 100 conversions to look at throughout your split test. Right, so if that means that you've got to send 600 visitors to your site, and 300 go to variation A and 300 go to variation B, and one of them brings in 100 opt-ins, so that's a approximately 33% conversion rate, and another one only brings in 50, so that's around 15% and change. Well, at that point, you can more confidently say, wow, this one has double the conversion rate. This one performs twice as well. Now, even then, even in that case, that's still a pretty small sample group, but you got to work with what you have, right? You got to work with the resources that you have. And I would say, as a minimum, 100 conversions, 100 results would be the threshold that you really want to try and aim for. The bigger the sample size, the more certain you can be of the results is just the rule to remember there. So key things to consider here: all variations and all variables that you try, you want to test them in isolation. That includes, by the way, what we talked about in the previous module. Each of those instances of having, let's say, a pop-up with a coupon offer, or having a certain bonus on your page, or the social proof bubbles in the bottom left-hand side, those things are independent variables as well, right? So you don't want to just slap that on there and have that potentially impacting, another split test where you were trying to, determine the difference between a headline choice. And little did you realize, variation A performed really well, but variation A also had the social proof bubbles in the bottom left, and variation B didn't. And so now you don't know which of those two things, the headline or the social proof, caused the increased conversions, right? So you want to make sure each of these things is tested in isolation, or that you are able to track them in isolation with multivariate testing if you have the software for that. But again, that requires a higher volume of traffic, okay? So make sure if you're doing multivariate split testing that you're able to track everything in isolation, and that you have a big enough sample group to draw reasonable and certain conclusions from the data that you get out of that. But that's what it all comes down to, guys, is split testing. Use a little bit of common sense, use a little bit of outside-the-box creativity sometimes, tweak things, test things, and just really dig in and enjoy the process of increasing your conversion, seeing what it takes to make more from less, right? More results from less traffic. You're really going to enjoy the decreased customer acquisition costs and the increased profits that you have when you see that a greater percentage of your existing traffic is converting into sales. So hopefully this was useful to you guys. I hope you get out there, put this stuff to use, put these things into action, and start boosting those conversion rates.